everywhere right now, that toxic content basically gets more engagement, right? Gets more attention.
Yes.
So at least in our study, in our context, that's not what we found.
All right, let's talk about some of those results. What were they? Anything surprising?
Well, first of all, something that is not maybe shocking, but to me it was very interesting, is that so the way we extract ideology is by looking at the retweet network. Depending on who retweets, we can more or less assign you to one opinion poll or another. So it's like the retweet network is telling us who is leaning towards what opinion poll. My point is that we don't assume a priori any of these um, dynamic, whether you lean more towards A, B, or C. The routine network tells us. And we found that once we applied our methodology, our 5 political parties in this last case that we just discussed, very naturally we could draw them on a line from left to right that would match almost perfectly the intuition that people have about them, as in the routine network, without telling without making any assumption, without telling it anything a priori, was telling you, okay, these are the social tensions that are very important in this system, and these social tensions match very well what we intuitively believe that they are. Basically, we compared the results of our study from the results of surveys that asked people to place these political parties along a line, and they matched very well. So that was, let's say, one, to me, surprising because it worked very well, and it was a nice validation. There are more complex tensions than just two camps fighting each other. There are
Yeah.
internal tensions. You can, for example, very easily see this when you have a very contentious primary in one of the camps.
Samuel, you've done multiple studies and you've been involved in many studies.
Yeah.
And you look a lot at individuals, groups, that groups and group versus group dynamics. So let's talk about one of these studies briefly. You've looked at individuals and the collective response to systems.
Yeah.
So explain to us what that is, and what you found.
Yeah, sure. This study on the collective response of social systems to individual actions, right? So it sounds abstract, but it's actually very, very straightforward. It all started because for a long time in the group where I was doing my PhD, we were interested in studying online social media data. In particular, we studied a lot of Twitter data. And we were interested, of course, in understanding who were influential users in a network. So we always start simple, and then if we need to, we complicate things. So in this case, we needed basically a measure of influence. So we kept it very simple, as I said, a very natural measure of influence in Twitter, now X, can be retweets, right? How many retweets you obtain, and that can be considered like a collective response of the system you are in. The system is Twitter, the collective response is people retweeting your messages. What is individual action here? The individual action is mostly posting tweets. So what we looked at to understand how different users had different levels of influence was basically computing the ratio between the two. Number of retweets that you obtain, let's say, in a given conversations for a given period of time, divided by the number of tweets that you posted. And in we started this study because we realized that in many different conversations, we found a very similar pattern of how this metric, which we call efficiency, how this efficiency was distributed. As in, this is like, for example, if you look at certain let's say, human statistics. Like we could look at hate, for example, and then you have this very well-known bell-shaped curves, right? With some typical value, and then where many people have that kind of hate. I don't know, maybe it's around 170 for men. You probably know much better than me, being a nurse. And then you have very few people that are particularly shorter, like very short, and very few people that are very tall, right? And you find that everywhere in the world. It's just that this mean value changes. We found something very similar for this efficiency, how it was distributed. As in, it wasn't that there was a typical value, it was more that there were many people with very little efficiency, then even more people with intermediate efficiency, like around one, basically getting one retweet per tweet. So, I mean, you are not really influential at all, right? You're probably just using it with your friends. And then we saw a very progressive, very, very slow decline, as in you had less and less and less and less people that, of course, were more and more and more popular. So we basically found this shape everywhere, and we were wondering, why is it everywhere? Is it something related to human behavior? Is it something else? And what we found out in this study is that at least the basic shape, if you, let's say, zoomed out and you were just interested in the general statistics, could be understood just with very simple math, by assuming that number of retweets that you got and the number of tweets that you posted were not related. As in, you could post one tweet or 1,000 tweets in a given period of time, and or better still, if we take one person that posted one tweet and another person that posted 1,000 tweets in a given period of time, we could equally likely say that, we could equally likely predict that they obtained 1 million retweets or one retweet in what we usually call, let's say, a first order approximation, as in it's a rough approximation of reality. So it depends on how much you want to zoom in or zoom out in your problem. If you just want general statistics, what we discovered is that this is good enough. You don't really need to think about integrate human behavior to understand this thing, this generality of this efficiency distribution. That was enough. Of course, then to understand the details, we needed to include more ingredients of the social system, in particular in Twitter. If we wanted to refine our understanding of how this efficiency worked, something very natural is to include information from the follower network, which again, it's, I think, very intuitive. You have more followers, you get more retweets. The thing is that it is surprising, and it was quite exciting to me personally to see how well our very, very simple mathematical models could predict reality only by including these very minimal things that we intuitively understand that should indeed affect this notion of popularity that are retweets in this case. And yeah, this is a study that again started with retweets, but that then we thought, okay, that is not the only social system that behaves in that way, right? There are other social systems that also have or that also are organized in a way that people basically do basic, simple actions, and the whole collective reacts to those actions. And another very good example is science, where scientists publish papers, and then what we hope is that people cite those papers because they are relevant, they're interesting, etc.
Yeah.
So we also measured this in science, and we found very similar stuff.
Yeah. So Samuel, let me ask you, do you think that all behavior probably follows some type of bell curve, some type of, maybe all is too obtuse, but like do we all kind of would you think that a lot of behavior is on a bell curve, kind of like minimum people, you get the shorter end of the stick, you get the mean, and then you get the, I guess, higher end of the stick when it comes to like social situations, basically? Like, is it all kind of, a lot of them kind of like gonna have some type of curve going on?
That's a great question. That's actually an underlying question to many of the things that we do in our research.
Okay.
And what I would say is that it depends on your level of zoom into the social problem that you are looking at. As in certain certain questions about how we are organized as societies are related, let's say, to a higher level of zoom. It's like if you zoom in a map and you just drop a random pin, maybe you just want to wonder where that pin fell, as in which continent, and that's fine maybe for you at that moment. And it's like, oh, it's Asia, but maybe you need more precise information. You need to go look closer, and it's like, okay, so it fell where? Oh, it fell in Japan.
Gotcha.
And so this depends on the question. So we have some questions, like the one that I just talked to you about, that it is fine to have this zoomed out perspective. In other questions, that is not enough. You go to zoom in and in and in. And actually, in my field, which is computational social science mainly, and related fields also from the social sciences, sociology, etc., you will very often see researchers argue about these things because basically many of us have a different zoom level perspective. Let's say for some people, being very precise of let's say individual and collective dynamics is very important. So they are very worried about the details. And in those cases, it's very difficult to say that we fall into a bell curve. How? Let me see if I can explain this with any example.
Any good, like, analogy?
Yeah, let's say, I don't know. I have worked, for example, with social network data from high school. So let's say that you are a principal in a high school and you are worried about, I don't know, uh, about certain students that are not engaged enough, that might have some learning issues, blah, blah, blah. Of course, for those issues, you need to get into the details, and it is very difficult to have any notion of bell curve to say, okay, so this student will respond to this and this, I don't know, interventions so that they would improve because we have measured it and we are like robots. No, we are not.
Yeah.
But if we zoom out and this same principal is wondering about how different students from the school connect to each other on an aggregate level, different social groups from different backgrounds, then we start seeing patterns. And those patterns can be surprisingly clear. And then we can start to kind of fit behaviors into this kind of bell curves. And I'm telling you, like in those cases, you can have this weird sensation that we indeed are like robots. It's not that we are, it's just that when you get enough of us, then you start getting clear statistics.
I love it. I love it. No, it's not weird at all. I heard somebody say, we evolved with code. Our brain is coded a certain way from evolution. I'm like, okay, that's a cool way to put it, I guess. Okay, so you basically, when you guys looked at this Twitter, you found that that in the middle, there's people getting, most people are not really, most people don't have much influence on Twitter. There's kind of like this hierarchy going on. But a lot of people like me, I would assume that the more you tweet, the more likely you are to get retweeted. But actually, that really had not much of a relationship from my understanding. It was more so you guys, I don't know if you guys looked at it deeper, but something that you did notice was obviously if you have more followers, you're going to get more retweets. Not necessarily tweeting more. Okay. So maybe it's people pulling their, pulling other people from other platforms. It could be, who knows? Like maybe you're popular somewhere.
And you also saw, I think, this is more of an anecdote rather than part of the research, but you saw that people had that intuition, right? I don't know if this is still going on in current X, but in Twitter it was very normal and a very normal strategy to get more attention, basically to try to get followers from wherever. Like, I don't know, asking random people like, follow me, I follow you, etc. That kind of thing. Because people, of course, like that's a very natural thing. And the other thing that you said, if you tweet more, you will get more retweeted. This has a lot to do, like this question has a lot to do with these levels of zoom that I was telling you about. If we zoomed out and we were, let's say, we wanted to know things about the general collective behavior, so of community, you wouldn't see these clear relationships between the two. But of course, if we look deeper, it is, I would expect, we didn't test it, as you said, we didn't looked much deeper into it because we were worried about, let's say, collective behavior rather than more detailed individual one. But most likely we will start seeing those patterns that in some cases with certain strategies, for sure, you would start getting more attention. Yeah, I mean,
well, what do you think about the findings of the research? Do you think do you think that just to clarify, the more you tweet doesn't mean you're going to get more retweets?
Not necessarily, and
Okay.
I mean not in every case. In many cases, you will get none or almost none. But yeah, if you have enough followers, of course.
Yeah, then yeah, it's so funny because
it's much intuition.
On TikTok it's different. It's like
I know
the algorithm. Okay,
I know.
So speaking of individuals and the collective response to them, you did a study on female physicists compared to male physicists, citation success and first mover advantage. Can you talk about that and what you found? This one was really interesting.
Sure. Yeah, indeed, it is definitely related to this collective response to individual actions, in this case in science. And basically, what we looked at in that project was, or what we were asking ourselves is how much, or if there was any sort of inequality between the attention that male researchers get versus the attention that female researchers get. Unfortunately, we couldn't go into more detail thinking about non-binary people, basically because it's working with real data. It's very tough. It's
right.
So you need to do some simplifications and sacrifices, unfortunately. But anyway, so that was our research question. Are people in this particular case in physics, we looked at millions of physics papers. Are female and male researchers getting different level of attentions? And indeed, we found that yes, women were disadvantaged in that case. And then we wondered why that was happening. And what we found is that there's this phenomenon, the first mover advantage, which is also very intuitive and very simple, which means that in science, if we both publish a certain result, whoever publishes first gets most, if not all of the attention, which can very natural. So what was happening is that first, men were publishing first much more frequently than women. This has probably several explanations. One very simple is that in physics, men are still the overwhelming majority, and they have been for a long time. We had historical data going back to, I think, 1910 or 1920, so very, very early data. Of course, those data were not very useful for us because still women had not joined the field. But then
Right.
after the 70s, yeah. Anyway, so there are more men. There have been earlier in the field. And of course, there are all sorts of historical biases that only now we are addressing. So if you combine all of this, it is natural that men publish earlier than women. If you correct for that, you see, I mean, for this earlier, more frequent earlier publication of men, you see that then the attention that women and men get are very similar. But still, there is a remaining small but significant remaining difference in equality in these citations favoring men, as in when men publish earlier than women, they tend to get a little bit more of an edge on this visibility than when women publish before men.
Gotcha. So just to recap, when you look at the data, first of all, you see that the first mover advantage is like if you make the first move to publish, you're going to be more likely to get attention.
Yeah.
And you guys found out that that's true.
Yeah.
Right. When you find a way to cancel that out, as you researchers do, you found that even without just the first mover advantage, just guys in general, not, you said small but significant, they still are more likely to get more attention.
Yeah.
So like you just said, with the zooming in, zooming out, if you zoom in, because we're all, I was talking to a researcher, and we are all biased, he said. We all have biases to help us survive, etc. What were you guys able to zoom in to kind of see what that was, what that was based on? Do you think it's that, okay, like, do you think that guys may find ideas from other guys more relatable? Kind of like if you were to go, and I wonder, like, if you were to go look at research with nurses or research with psychologists, etc., where like women dominate, I wonder if you see the same similar outcome where maybe.
Yeah, please, sorry.
No, yeah.
Okay.
You get what I'm saying.
No, that's a great question. And that's a great question that another colleague from my group, Ana Maria Jaramillo, is currently addressing. Yeah, because indeed we look just at physics, and it makes a lot of sense to look at other fields where women may dominate. But first, there is the first thing that I should say, I think, is that counterintuitively, in these fields like psychology or sociology, where we think that women may dominate, actually they don't. You see a lot of women in college, but what happens is that throughout their academic career, women drop out, and they tend to drop out more frequently of the career the more senior they progress. And so if in the data that we have access to, for example, in psychology and I think sociology, those are the fields indeed where there are more women, but still they are a minority, a big majority, relatively close to 50%, but not the absolute majority. And what we see in those fields is that still there's a small disparity favoring men. Interesting results that I could tell you about is that apparently in the beginning of our careers, men and women tend to get very similar attention. I'm talking about when you're starting your PhD or maybe your early years right after your PhD, but after that things seem to start to change, and we haven't looked at, or we don't have any definite results about that yet. We have other colleagues also that are looking at that kind of at that phenomenon, let's say. But of course, there are some intuitions, still speculations, but I think are quite reasonable, which are related, I think, to to our biases, social structures, how we organize families, for example. Very naturally, you will think, or I think at least, about maternal leaves.
Right.
Those kind of things affect
That's what I'm
women
thinking.
disproportionately. So we still don't have, at least in my group, that I know of, we still don't have hard data to show, okay, this is happening exactly because of that. But this is where our intuition is directed at the moment.
Yeah, that's what I'm wondering, because you said as you go up the ladder, women tend to kind of drop out, maybe because women have there's like I don't know, it's a stereotype. I haven't looked at research, but there's definitely the stereotype that women tend to be more diverse in interests and guys tend to be more narrow and wanting to, not as diverse in interests. So it wouldn't surprise me if women at a certain point were like, I want to have kids, and I'm probably gonna have to, you know, sit this one out a little bit more than guys.
Yeah.
So even in psychology, in the research area, guys tend to dominate because women tend to drop out.
Until now, yes. It
So
might
no.
be, hopefully it will be one of the first fields to even out from, the progression that we are seeing. But it is surprising, I think, to know that even in that field that you think it's women dominated, it is actually not.
Yeah,
At
it's not.
least research wise.
Okay.
Maybe in general in the profession, it is more women dominated, but in academic research, it not yet.
I wonder for nursing then. I know I wonder for nursing if that bias would be there. I know I've heard that, like, when it comes to therapy and stuff like that, I've heard people complain, I've heard guys complain and say it doesn't feel like it's a fit for them a lot of times. And so like that bias seems to kind of show up in therapy because there seems to be I don't know how true this is. That's this kind of internet speak. I don't know based off of research, because psychology and like the Freud theories and all these theories were dominated by guys.
Yeah.
So it's kind of, but there's this perception and a stereotype that women love therapy and all that stuff, and a lot of people perceive it as women dominating therapy and all that. And so a lot of guys say, well, it doesn't feel it feels like there's a bias towards for how women like to solve problems and etc. And I don't know how true that is. I don't know if there's data about that out there, but it wouldn't surprise me if there was some truth to that, at least maybe some truth. I don't know if
it might be, for sure. There, like, as you said, there might be that we have several, let's say, gender differences that really will determine this. Not only social biases, but also, yeah, just how we mentally, internally work, men and women. I don't know, this preference for diversity. Honestly, I'm not an expert on the field, so
yeah
it's mostly things that I read here and there, like more or less adjacent to my own research.
yeah
Also on risk aversion. Apparently, there's
yes
some research on that.
yeah
So yeah, those are definitely factors that we should look into going forward
yeah
to try to understand these differences.
as you said, zooming in. So once they zoom in, there's going to be like different compartments responsible for a certain percentage. So I wonder what the percentage is going to be off of the different things. Like, how much is it just like I want to you understand a guy maybe more, or maybe you do want to see a guy go up more, maybe it's just natural, you guys just think more similar. I don't know, like the percentage of how much of each would be like super interesting for both, for everyone.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So let's continue with the group dynamics. You've done research related to group dynamics on Twitter. What inspired that study?
So that study, or most of our group dynamics investigation in Twitter, comes from an interest in social polarization, which I think it's a tremendously hot topic right now. But for me, it has been one of my passions since I started my PhD 10 years ago. And I know that it has been going on for a long time in the social sciences and also in the computational social science. Um, so because we were interested in polarization, and we also wanted to get our hands on a lot of data, as much as we could. And in Twitter, for researchers, it used to be relatively easy to get data directly from the platform to understand how we behave. That's what we did. We went there and we extracted a ton of data on different controversial topics. Mostly we focused on elections, and we tried to understand social polarization using those data.
Gotcha. Before we get into this group dynamics on Twitter with how groups kind of prop their own group up and how the hate towards the other group works, I did want to just ask you, is there anything that you know based off of research that can give someone edge who is the minority in a group? Like, for example, like the female physicists who are not getting who have a disadvantage.
Yeah.
Is there anything based off of research that you've seen that can make them get a little bit to kind of even that out as much as possible?
So of course there's no silver bullet, and of course there are like other colleagues are working on different aspects of the problem. Considering what we have worked on, probably the best advised is a bit shitty, but it is what it is you probably have to work harder, as in not harder as in producing more research, blah blah, which is also, I mean, that's also true in certain fields. Additional productivity by women affects them more, I mean, more positively. It's more important for them than for men. That's one thing. But then something that we look a lot at is how these differences in visibility are related to different structures of our social networks. In science, for example, the structure of the network of your collaborators, the people you work with, because we work with people from many different institutions, from many different countries, not just from our own, let's say, research institute. And looking at our studies of how different minorities get advantages and disadvantages in social networks, it seems that one way to counteract, at least partially, these disadvantages in visibility is to also work more on that front, as in open up more, as many contacts, as many social connections as you can. And not only with, let's say, the majority group. If you're a woman and you're worried about the gender, that would probably be men. But of course, our identities are multidimensional. That's something that we are also looking at. But anyway, not only the majority, more privileged groups you should contact, but also your own group. So that would be, I guess, our main
recommendation.
The recommendation, yes. Thank you.
Yeah.
It's tough, but
that's just what it
the
is.
only thing you can do is, the only thing you can do, unless the other groups do something to also reach out for you, is working more, make more connections inside and outside of your own group.
Gotcha. Okay. All right. So back to the group dynamic on Twitter when it comes to you guys basically studied in-group love and out-group hate, and you saw how far which which worked better in the group. So how was this study designed? Kind of just, but
So it was a very interesting study because it came together from, let's say, several fronts. From one side, we had looked at this efficiency distribution that we were talking about in the beginning. So we were looking at influential users, etc. From the other side, we had also some research already uh, where we basically extracted the ideology of people online, of Twitter users. Imagine that you can go online. It's relatively feasible right now. I would say even super easy with the addition of AI right now
right.
to infer whether you lean more Democrat or Republican if you're in a US context. This is something that we had done for some European contexts. So we basically asked ourselves if it made sense to combine those two. And that's how this we got inspired for this research. We have a measure of popularity, we have a measure of ideology, so we can somehow relate how moderate or how extremist you were with how influential you were. And then we included an additional layer because we felt that that was not enough. It was a matter actually of zooming in, as we were talking about.
I love it.
And for this research, I really enjoyed it because until then, we were mostly, let's say, quantitative scientists. The team was mostly former physicists, basically. That's what I studied, physics.
Yeah.
Before turning into this social stuff. But for that study, we reached out to a sociologist and a political scientist. And thanks to them, we could really go much deeper. So we designed this additional layer for this study where we looked at the content of the message. And basically, we looked at whether the content, okay, maybe you were more or less extremist, you were more or less popular, but what were you publishing? Were you publishing things that were mostly supportive, mostly positive, or neutral? Or were you publishing hateful and toxic stuff? So that was the idea, combining these three methodologies.
Gotcha. So you looked at people, you looked at basically Republicans, Democrats.
We actually looked at the Spanish context.
Well, okay.
And yeah, and in Spain, basically, we also have a very strong left-wing, right-wing division.
Okay.
So something very, let's say, equivalent probably, or at least analogous.
Yeah, yeah. So you publish people who lean left-leaning, right-leaning, and you basically tried to see who was more popular and why. Like, what were they posting? Were they posting neutral stuff? Were they posting positive things about the group, or were they posting negative things about the other group?
Yeah.
In a nutshell. So what were the results? Anything surprising?
Definitely, yes. Because there's this intuition that it's almost everywhere right now that toxic content basically gets more engagement, right? Gets more attention.
Yes.
So at least in our study, in our context, that's not what we found. We actually drew like a map of these users. And in this map, we place, on, let's say, one axis popularity, the other axis ideology, and then we looked at content, as you said. And we saw that at both ends of the spectrum, it didn't matter if you were left-wing or right-wing. If you posted toxic content, you were probably not that popular. It's of course difficult to, let's say, establish the like the causality here. What came first? Was it that unpopular people post toxic stuff, or was it because they were toxic they didn't become popular? We still don't know, but that relationship was very clearly there.
Wow. Yeah, you're right. It goes against your intuition because you do see a lot of toxic people who come off as toxic as more popular right now.
Yeah,
But I'm sure if we looked at it better, we'd see maybe they actually had a lot of positive stuff to say about the in group.
exactly.
Yeah, so we're just not really paying attention. That's very interesting. Okay.
Yeah, this opens a bunch of questions. Like, I have several intuitions. One is that it might be that we have this negativity bias. So when we see something negative, that's what we kind of remember. That's what impacts us, and that's what, you know, because it makes you angry. So
Yes. You might
so
be
that's what we
right.
remember.
Yeah. Okay. Huh. That's so
And
interesting.
and there might be less of that than we think. And the other thing is that, yeah, that when we think, for example, in our own in versus out group, we think about the out group as being very hateful, blah, 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 only because of that. But most likely, as you said, out groups with respect to us internally, of course, they have to be positive about themselves and be probably supportive. So, and it is reasonable to think that people that are internally supportive of their in group, they should be popular within their in group.
Okay. That's a great study. Okay, so you you did a paper on multipolar systems.
Yes.
This was great. What inspired this study?
So what inspired this study is that in talking about polarization around 2015, in Spain, we had transition from a bipartisan system to a multi-partisan system. We used to be very, very similar in that sense to the US. We had our own Democrats, Republicans, and then a bunch of independent parties started to get
That's what's gonna happen.
more and more traction.
That's what's gonna happen. Yeah.
And so we no longer could use the traditional conventional tools to look at polarization because we didn't have two camps, but several camps with different, let's say, social tensions between them. Yeah, that's exactly what inspired this research. How can we look at polarization when you don't have two poles but several opinion poles?
So you guys have like different party systems now, different groups that have gained traction in different independent groups. Okay, and that's so interesting. That's what I feel like is happening now. I feel like that's happened in America now. So that's cool. Okay. So yeah, let's talk about the design of the study. So how'd you guys look at these different systems and stuff like that?
Yeah, so usually what we do is first we look for some controversial event that is happening or that is going to happen, because that's where polarization manifests,
Mm.
right? That's what you can find where you can find polarization. Um, Typical examples are elections. So when we know that an election is coming, we have a bunch of meetings to decide how we are going to get data from that. And usually we basically write down a bunch of keywords so that we can download, in this case, tweets. I mean, most of the times it was tweets matching those keywords. Of course, people use your standard hashtags to talk about the election, but not only. There are the names of the party leaders, the names of the parties, things like that. And once we have that, yeah, we start downloading things. For this multipolar project, if I remember correctly, we downloaded over 40 million tweets, I think, from over 4 million users. So it's a lot. Think that in Spain we have 45 million people. So it's not tiny, the fraction of users that, with respect to people, that we have access to. And so that's for the data. And then we also have in parallel to think about our conceptual framework. In this multipolar project, we had to think about how we were going to model this idea of an ideological space with more than two opinion poles. Because if you have two, it's relatively simple. You can draw a line. In one extreme, you put pole A, in the other extreme, you put pole B. But if you have three, things get already more complicated.
Yes.
Where do you place this third pole? Do you place it somewhere on the line? Well, if you place it in the middle, it's like you're assuming that they are moderates, but maybe they are not. Maybe they just have fundamentally different ideologies, different opinions than the other two. So we had to go to a higher dimensional space, which sounds technical, but if you have three poles, it's actually very simple. You just draw a triangle, just an equilateral triangle, and that's your ideology space. That's where you are going to place, in our case, your Twitter users. If you have more, then things get a bit more complicated, but you follow the same principle, placing the poles at the same distance from each other, and then running some math to actually know where these poles are in this ideological space. To answer the question, how these tensions from these different opinion poles, these different political parties are organized, who are more likely to be allies, who are more likely to be opposers.
Wow. So do you guys, Samuel, in Spain, do you guys have a three-party system right now? That's pretty popular.
We had until 5 strong political parties at some point. Right now, yeah, I would say we are more or less at 5. We went a little bit back to the two-party system, but at some point in this multipolar paper, we showed this. We had 5 different parties. 2 were mostly leaning left, 3 were mostly leaning right.
Oh,
so the system was very complex, but we got very interesting results out of this new framework that we introduced.
All right, let's talk about some of those results. What were they? Anything surprising?
Well, first of all, something that is not maybe shocking, but to me it was very interesting, is that so the way we extract ideology is by looking at the retweet network. Depending on who retweets, we can more or less assign you to one opinion poll or another. So it's like the retweet network is telling us who is leaning towards what opinion poll. My point is that we don't assume a priori any of these dynamic, whether you lean more towards A, B, or C. The retweet network tells us. And we found that once we applied our methodology, our 5 political parties in this last case that we just discussed, very naturally, we could draw them on a line from left to right that would match almost perfectly the intuition that people have about them. As in the retweet network, without making any assumption, without telling it anything a priori, was telling you, okay, these are the social tensions that are very important in this system, and these social tensions match very well what we intuitively believe that they are. Basically, we compared the results of our study from the results of surveys that asked people to place these political parties along a line, and they matched very well. So that was, let's say, one, to me, surprising because it worked very well, and it was a nice validation. And then we look at other secondary axes of tension. So the main axis of tension is left wing, right wing. But there were others that were, for example, internal competition between parties that compete for the same electorate. Of course, people that lean left have to decide between the left-leaning parties. Same for the people that lean right. So there were some internal competition that we could capture using our methodology applied to this retweet network. The other axis that we found was extremism. We also found there was an axis that said, okay, this bunch of parties are mostly on this side, this other bunch of parties are mostly on this side, and the division between the two is that we have on one side parties that are more in the extremes of the spectrum, and on the other side parties that are moderate, regardless of where in the left wing, right wing spectrum they like.
That's interesting. So it's interesting for a few reasons because so the fact that there was 3 right leaning and 2 left, I find that a little bit interesting because if if they're breaking off based off of tension, I don't know how similar your right wing party in Spain is, but like here, you have kind of people who are right wing more so for like social reasons. Then you have people who are right wing more for like government reasons. They just kind of don't want government. They want less government in business, capitalism reasons. And then you have a lot of libertarians who tend to kind of low key be kind of Republican for that. And then for the left side, it's mostly about they do want government regulation, so a safety social net, um, and then they tend to care about then they have their own view of how social life should be, but it tends to be more freedoms socially and a little bit more stricter with government coming in to regulate capitalism a little bit. That's traditionally kind of what it is. But then there's tension internally. I would think that the left tends to be divided with so many different groups that there would be more probably groups left leaning breaking off due to different tension. But for you guys, that seems to be a little different. It seems like the right is breaking off due to different tension, and that's I wonder what the politics is so nuanced and complex, but I would wonder what the bigger picture is when it comes to why there's so much tension, or to the point where they're breaking off so many different groups. Who knows if it's a tension problem and if it's more of a, like, I don't know. That's kind of interesting. What do you think?
Definitely. Yeah, what we have done so far with these studies is kind of diagnose the situation, but we need to go deeper to understand the causes. Yes, this is something that in our case we need to do from like in our next projects, but there are several intuitions. But before getting into that, let me just tell you that I think you are again very much on the right intuition here, as in I also, like, other American researchers have approached me when I have presented this research, and they were like, yeah, like we have had the two-party system in the US, but of course there are more complex tensions than just two camps fighting each other. There are internal tensions. You can, for example, very easily see this when you have a very contentious primary in one of the two parties, right? So it's not like this multipolar idea is just a European thing at all. Yeah, that's one thing. The other thing, just for context, that I wanted to tell you is that your intuition about usually left wing basically being more prone to splitting into into sub parties. After this research project, we finished it a couple or 3 years ago. After we finished our analysis, of course, reality continued, and the way reality has continued is that one of those three important right-wing parties has basically completely dissolved. So then their votes have gone back to the other two, I guess. And on the left side, one left-wing party has split in two. So at least in Spain, things are not I mean, they keep evolving. They are very dynamical, and so it's not trivial to think that maybe it's a different system where some part of the ideological spectrum is more or less monolithical, or I mean, they fight more, they fight less. It's dynamic and evolving. So that's also something that is very interesting to us, because it means that we need to keep studying and keep understanding the system. Which brings me to the actual question, what you were asking, that like, how can we understand why or from where these tensions emerge on from where do new tensions emerge so that they maybe create even new parties. So one intuition that we have is that, of course, it has to be with underlying values. You were also very nicely describing these differences in fundamental values, right? That usually divide people into these political camps. But there might be other reasons. And this is something that we are starting to look at right now. And there is very little research on this. There's some very interesting, but still we're, let's say, on the very beginning of this research line, which is the fact that it might be that our very worldview is what divides us even more than our values. Basically, what values we perceive as important versus irrelevant, and maybe more important, what values do we perceive as related? It might be that that because we believe that because X happens, and or because you believe X, you have to also believe Y, Z, and Y, and T. I don't know. That creates even stronger differences. And to me, intuitively, this connects to this sensation that sometimes you have when you debate with someone with different ideas, that sometimes you feel like you are not really debating ideas themselves, but that they are basically connecting ideas in weird ways that you cannot relate to, or prioritizing arguments that for you are irrelevant. So it might be that it is these differences of worldviews. But it's something that we have to test now.
And I wonder how much temperament plays into this, right? If you're much more, I don't know if you're into Big Five. I'm obsessed with Big Five. But if you're like, people that listen to this, they should, we've spoken about this a few times on this podcast by now, but if you're very high on openness and if you have this natural instinct, or you're higher on openness, you have this natural instinct to be more explorative and open-minded to different ways of things, and you're less easily you're not as easily disgusted as quickly. Like you're just, that part of your brain just doesn't wire up literally the same way that other people may. You're going to have a different experience to things, and you're going to care about different things, and you're going to value things differently and prioritize things differently. So I wonder how much temperament plays into just people's natural inclination to stuff, right? Maybe those who are higher on openness and maybe low on conscientiousness. Like I wonder what's the makeup of what we consider extreme. Like even in our camp, you also have like people who are nationalists, but like I don't want to get the word wrong, because proud of being American, but also like to the point where they see you can't criticize being American. Like you have white nationalists, you have people who are extremely proud of and obsessed with race and obsessed with that type of stuff, and that's usually a lot of times more so on the right for our country. And just the temp, the makeup of people like that would be interesting. Like, or the makeup of people who just really don't want change. They want things to be conserved. Their intuitions with how the world works, that's interesting. Like, I wonder how much of that is related to just different temperaments. And then when you see the extreme on the left, what people call the extreme on the left, where it's like being extremely polite and never wanting to say anything that may be offensive, even if it's just the science and it's research and it's etc. I wonder what the makeup of that is, how high they maybe are on openness, how high they are on conscientiousness, stuff like that. It'd be interesting to see the temperament of these different Like if you zoomed out, what's the overall temperament of the group? What, you know what I mean? That would be
And
interesting.
again, great intuition. Unfortunately, I cannot give you good answers about this, but at least partially good answers I can give you, which are that I'm 99% sure that there is already research on this. There might be even some established facts by now, but unfortunately, I'm not really familiar with those. So just to tell you that if people want to look for this, information is out there, but I cannot give it to you. Sorry.
You're all good.
But for sure, people have, sorry. I mean, for now at least. I mean, it might be that in the future I get into those kind of questions too, but for now I haven't looked at it myself and I haven't read, or like, I have read some of it, but I don't remember specific stuff. I think you're on the right path. I think you're right that there are some correlations, some relationship between different aspects of temperament and different aspects of your ideology, but I couldn't right now pinpoint, okay, it has to, I don't know, like this aspect of ideology raised to this aspect of maybe the big five. But
Gotcha.
yeah.
Yeah. Samuel, where can people find you?
Where, as in virtually or physically?
Virtually. How can people find you? Do you have a website, Twitter?
So people can find more than me, my group, my current research group in Blue Sky and X2. If you look for network inequality, we also have a website. I think if you, again, just Google network inequality, we should appear relatively high up. And there you can go through all of our like main research projects. And you can also find us, I mean, me and the other members of the team.
Yeah, well, that was great, Samuel. Thank you so much for coming on again. Once again.
Thank you for inviting me. It was amazing.